Okay, so what I'm going to talk about now, most of you probably had to deal with it already, and maybe some of you have been lucky enough to not deal with it. But when you write a program, you're inevitably at some point of time are going to run into some error. And I mean, pretty much programmers basically identify any error as a bug. That's what they call it. Programmers, any error is a bug in your code. Now, these bugs or errors are generally of two types. It can be a syntax error or a logic error. Now, a syntax error is basically something, a type of error that violates the understanding of the computer, which is handling the program. So, it's something which is not part of the programming language. It's something you write which the computer does not make sense of, it cannot make sense of. And it's generally caused by like typos or something like that, or maybe an abstract-minded programmer who's thinking of something else while programming. I don't know. So an example would be like, suppose you say like a equals to 5 plus, and there's nothing else. So I mean, the computer sees that and like it says like, okay, I know how to do addition with this plus, but I need two numbers, and there's just 5, and there's nothing else. And so the computer will freak out and there won't be any compilation. And so I mean, these types of errors, once you hit the play button, your start, or you run your program, I mean, these types of error are easy to find because no, the computer said no, you can't do this. I mean, it just makes no sense. Please check your program and fix it. So you'll know where you have done your syntax error. The logic error, on the other hand, is much more difficult to figure out, and it occurs when you enter something that does not give the results you want. Here, however, your instructions are fine. They don't violate the programming language, but you probably messed up giving the instructions themselves. So, to give you an example, would be like, so you wanted to add two numbers, but you, instead of putting the plus sign, you put, suppose, the asterisk or the multiplication sign instead. And I mean, to the computer that's fine. I mean, they can handle multiplication as much as they can handle addition. But if you put 3, if you're wanting to add 3 with 8, and you're getting an answer of 24, then you'll probably scratch your head and think, what's happening? I didn't expect 3 plus 8 to be 24. I wanted 11. So that's a very basic example, an obvious example of a logic error. It can be much more complicated than this when you have like 1,000 lines of codes, and I mean, you didn't do any syntax error. You probably messed up giving your flowchart or your idea somewhere. So being a programmer, you would always have to assume that your user might be an idiot, that your user might be person who does not know how to handle applications and will mess up most of the time. So um, you have to set steps for dealing with both valid and invalid data, or valid and invalid input. So like, in the application we're talking about in the form, so what is valid and invalid data? So in, suppose, your text box, where you want to um, enter the number of like silver phones you want, and somebody goes in there and just types like something like none or red or something, they the program is asking there to put some number, not words, right? And like somebody would just go like 5, FIVE 5 instead of the number 5. Now you need to account for these scenarios. This is an example of invalid data for that text box. Or maybe, I mean, these are supposed to be integers, but somebody would somehow manage to type in like 5.5, which does not make sense for a number of a phone, right? So in these cases, you have to account for these cases and make sure your program does not crash. It's supposed to put a dialog box saying that you can't enter a text or a fraction in these text boxes. So you have to be sure that you need to test your program with these kinds of wrong inputs or idiotic inputs. And here is an example. So you need to test your program with valid data. So suppose for blue false you have 5, and make sure your program works, and also make sure it works with like an invalid data, here a T in the blue phones.